Welcome to the other side of Letby. In episode 76, we're going to go back over a video that Stuart Gillum did, I think it was 5 months ago. And it was about the mortality in the neonatal unit at the Countess Chester Hospital after Lucy Letby left. Now, of course, it was never stated implicitly that this mortality fell because Lucy Letby was no longer murdering babies, but it was implied that that was the case. And the two main people, to me, who implied it were Dr. John Gibbs, now retired consultant, and Judith Moritz from the BBC. And I'll leave you a link to Stuart's video so you can watch it. It's his usual high quality of work, and I would advise you to watch it. And you can clearly hear Dr. Gibbs state that only one death in 7 years, and Judith Moritz repeat that. Now, as Stuart points out in his video, that there were 3 deaths in 2017, 3 in 2019, and 3 in 2021, which is 9 deaths by 2021, which is a long way from 1 death in 7 years. To begin with, we know that before 2016, when the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health turned up to review this place, they had already been downgraded, and that means that they were no longer a local neonatal unit, even though the RCPCH concluded when they reviewed them that they were never a local neonatal unit because they didn't have the staffing levels and the consultant cover that was needed to meet the British Association of Perinatal Medicine requirements for a local neonatal unit. So they may have behaved like one, but they were never staffed to be one, which is enough on its own to explain why these babies in 2015 and 2016 sadly died. And Stuart provides a link to a Thirlwell inquiry document. And if Thirlwell inquiry has been of any use at all, it has been for supplying these types of documents. And it's dated 7th of July 2016. And the document says, "We are temporarily changing the admission arrangements for our neonatal unit to focus predominantly on lower risk babies." So in the first sentence, they're saying that from the 7th of July 2016, we are no longer taking high-risk babies. And they define low-risk babies as those born after 32 weeks, which is not always necessarily the case. Now, remarkably also, this document said that the hospital had a Care Quality Commission inspection earlier this year, February. That's February 2016. And the results published showed no concerns about our outcomes for babies. So despite what we're told, that from 2015 on, these consultants were deeply concerned and they were going to the management all the time, when the CQC came, they didn't express any concern, and the CQC didn't document any concern about a spike in mortality in 2015 or in 2016. Now, we know that there were more deaths than in 2016. It was an absolutely horrendous year for more reasons than one, as we'll see. But if we look up to February 2016, the babies that Lucy Letby was accused of murdering in the period from June 2015 to February 2016, that takes us all the way down to baby K. So in June of 2015, we have baby A, baby B, baby C. July 2015, baby D. August 2015, baby E. September 2015, baby G. October 2015, baby H. October 2015, baby I. February 2016, baby J. February 2016, baby K. And then April 2016, baby L and M. June, baby N. June 2016, babies O and P. So we can see that the massive part of Lucy Letby's so-called murder spree took place in 2015. And within 2 weeks of the death of baby O and baby P, this unit was downgraded to babies over 32 weeks. And that isn't even true, because baby O and baby P were born at 33 weeks, but they were triplets. And this Thirlwell inquiry document carries on. Nevertheless, we have seen in some of our most poorly babies, those with high dependency needs, an increase in neonatal mortality rates for 2015 and 2016 compared to previous years. In light of this, we have asked for an independent review of our neonatal service from the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health and the Royal College of Nursing, which is expected to be completed by the end of August. So we have an admission here of sorts that the babies were poorly, or most poorly babies, and referring to them specifically as those with high dependency needs, which is categorically inaccurate, because you will see that every one of the babies who died were or should have been in a neonatal intensive care unit in a tertiary unit. And the definition of a high dependency baby, while it may be similar, has a different meaning or context depending on where the baby is. So a baby in a level 2 unit, such as the Countess of Chester Hospital, has nowhere else to go if it deteriorates but to a level 3 unit. In other words, a high dependency baby who becomes slightly sicker needs transferred, whereas in a tertiary unit or a level 3 unit, they can be stepped up and down as required. So the fact of the matter is that all of the babies that Lucy Letby was said to have killed should never have been in a local neonatal unit. And they were not high dependency babies, they were intensive care babies. And the reason that we know they were intensive care babies is because throughout the trial, the doctors stated that the babies had been admitted to neonatal intensive care. Now, you would wonder why an experienced journalist like Judith Moritz would fail to see that, and why a very experienced person like Dr. Gibbs would fail to see that. Now, as Stuart points out in his video, there was a call for doctors who were not directly involved in any of the babies that Letby was said to have harmed to come forward and give statements to the Thirlwell inquiry, and I'll leave you a link to that. And one of these was a core participant, a junior doctor called Dr. Catherine Lydon. And Dr. Lydon started her career as a foundation doctor at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Don't know what that means. She worked in the paediatric and neonatal department from January 2015 to September 2015. So right in the peak of when a lot of this stuff was happening. And Dr. Lydon commented positively on the good teamwork and camaraderie between the junior medical doctors and the nursing team. And she's very specific in saying junior doctors. She doesn't mention the consultants, except to say that consultants weren't very present on the neonatal unit due to covering both pediatrics and neonates. And that's just an excuse, covering pediatrics and neonates. The statement there is the consultants weren't very present on the neonatal unit. Consultant ward rounds at the time occurred on 2 days a week, Dr. Lydon commented. From memory, there was some resentment from the nursing staff that the consultants weren't more present. I would say that's not a hard one to remember. And she said that despite this, Dr. Lydon was of the view that the quality of relationships on the neonatal unit didn't affect the care received by the patients. So the quality of the relationships that she's referred to is the relationships between the junior doctors and the nurses, which are generally quite good in nearly every hospital I've been in. And there's no doubt that if relationships are good, that means that the junior doctors are generally responding when they're called by the nurses, and that they have respect for the decisions of the nurses. So that shouldn't affect the care of the patients. But it's only one small part of the care of the patients. And it's said that, as with other doctors, undergoing training in pediatrics, Dr. Lydon rotated every 6 months approximately. Dr. Lydon's evidence is that when she moved to Liverpool Women's Hospital in September of 2015, as part of her training, there were some general comments that the Countess of Chester Hospital was having a tough time and lots of difficult cases. From memory, these were generic comments between nursing and medical staff. So, lots of difficult cases. Not high dependency, poorly babies, whatever that means, but difficult cases, or, as we would say, high acuity. And during her stay or her time at the Countess of Chester Hospital, Dr. Lydon was involved with the cares of baby A and baby B, and can, she says, recall discussions between paediatric trainees and neonatal unit nursing staff that the rashes or skin changes seen in both babies were unusual and no one had seen anything similar before. But Dr. Lydon said, I personally did not have any suspicions about baby A's death or baby B's collapse. Dr. Lydon was also involved in the care of baby E and baby F being present at their birth. She set out in her statement that in relation to baby F, she documented 4 results relating to the hypoglycemia hyposcreen sent on the 5th of August 2015. Dr. Lydon also put it in her notes that she discussed the results with Dr. ZA and recorded DW discussed with Dr. ZA insulin high, C-peptide low, unusual for hypoglycemia. Dr. Lydon states that she does not recall how she received the results, nor can she recall the conversation with Dr. ZA. She says that as a junior member of medical staff, I didn't appreciate the relevance of these results. And she goes on, as there were results that I was unfamiliar with interpreting, I discussed them with a consultant responsible for that week, Dr. ZA. I assume I documented the word unusual after my discussion with Dr. ZA, as that was Dr. ZA's interpretation of the results. Dr. Lydon's evidence is that she had no suspicions about Lucy Letby, but referred to vague memories of there being various discussions at points about the unusually high number of collapses and deaths on the unit. She goes on to say, I recall being aware at some point that the consultants collectively raised concerns and were considering potential reasons. One potential reason I remember being considered was the TPN, the total parental nutritional bag, could be contaminated or issues with equipment. Dr. Lydon does not recall any safeguarding training covering what to do were there concerns that a member of staff was abusing patients, nor does she recall any specific training on processes around child death. Now, you have to remember, this is a junior doctor learning how to be a consultant, but she doesn't remember how you deal with child deaths or suspicions that there may be safeguarding issues, or indeed that there may be pharmacy issues. Had she had any concerns at the time, she said she would have spoken to a consultant, and that as an extremely junior member of staff, I wouldn't think to take concerns outside of the trust as the first point of action. However, Dr. Lydon says, if I had concerns now as a consultant, I would speak to other medical colleagues in the first instance. I would then want to discuss with the medical director and seek advice from my defence union, that's our indemnity people, and the RCPCH about what to do next. So as a consultant now, she would have been reaching much further than the manager down the hall, is what she's saying. She's also saying that she never had any concerns over baby A and baby B, and she's quite dismissive really in her comments about Ravi Jayaram's magic pink flitting rash. So I find all of this quite interesting. They were aware in Liverpool Women's Hospital at the time in 2015 that there was problems at the Countess of Chester Hospital. And then we have Dr. Gail Beach, who was another one of the junior doctors at the time, and she comments that when she returned to the Countess of Chester Hospital in July of 2016, the most noticeable difference was that there was a consultant-led ward round on the neonatal unit daily, compared to twice per week before that date, and a named consultant responsible specifically for the neonatal unit every day, rather than it being covered by the consultant also on duty for general paediatrics. This felt like a positive change. And I think Judith Morris should understand that when you have a senior person present on a ward every day, when you have a named consultant, you're going to have lower mortality. When you stop taking babies that are 504 grams, 800 grams, twins and triplets with very dangerous pregnancies in very dangerous condition when you take them because of complications of those pregnancies, you're going to have more deaths, whether Lucy Letby's in prison or whether she's not. So it is well worth reading all of this stuff. As I say, I'll leave you the link. It goes on and on. But there was no real concerns. And there was poor training when it came to incident reporting, safeguarding, working with the coroner, raising concerns and issues. And in general, when there is a trend going against you, it's wise to start the discussion early. You don't wait for Dr. Gibbs's magical tipping point when you end up having to pull the drawbridge up and the portcullis down on the entire unit. And I remember in a previous life as a director of an out-of-hours GP company, spending a couple of days with two lovely ladies from Yorkshire who came from the Medical Protection Society all the way over to Ireland to teach us how to protect ourselves, and to do so by raising issues as soon as possible. And we went through multiple scenarios, some of them theoretical and some of them from our own caseload, and it was very clear what they was telling us, that we had to be involved with the coroner on a very regular basis if there were problems with mortality, even individual mortality, even a case of someone dying unexpectedly. One case, we had to discuss it with the coroner. Now, that would have been my practice anyway, and I was frequently asked during my time, was there a need for a post-mortem? And in every case, I answered, yes, there is. I can't tell you exactly how this person died or why they died, so we do need a post-mortem. Now, luckily, where I worked, there was a very good pathology department in the local hospital, and the local pathologist or the state pathologist or assistant state pathologist was always available to do a post-mortem, and there was never much of a delay. And we learned so much from the post-mortems that really did improve what we were doing. Now, these wouldn't necessarily be mistakes, but they would be, for instance, over-reliance on particular types of scans or particular types of evaluations of the condition of a patient at any particular time in their disease. That turned out post-mortem not to be the case. And one of the things that was particularly useless in my experience was a chest x-ray. You couldn't rely on them for love nor money. And you also had to be very careful who was reporting all the radiology that you were reading. If you got a report from a consultant radiologist with experience, they were demonstrably more reliable than reports that came from less experienced people. So as we became more dependent on CT scans and MRI scans and that type of thing, I became more cautious about how I would interpret them, which is something that came out in the review that we had from the MPS at the time of our safeguarding and audit training. So I find it particularly galling that a single X-ray that was taken of a baby, say a baby C, to show where the line was or where the NGT was or if there was a chest infection or whatever reason it was taken, that X-ray was then used for another purpose, to give evidence that it wasn't gathered or aimed at collecting. Because I'm just telling you that even when you do a specific investigation for a disease, it isn't always as accurate as you would think. So I get the impression that the junior doctors who are on the ground, dealing with the nurses, day-to-day stuff, weren't that bothered by what was going on at the Countess of Chester Hospital. What they were bothered about, all of them, was that there was a general lack of consultant presence on the ward, and that was one of the changes that happened when the unit downgraded. Isn't that amazing? They start doing more ward rounds when they have less sick babies. What would be very interesting to see would be statistics that show us how many babies were transferred out of the Countess of Chester Hospital as a consequence of these ward rounds, compared to how many were transferred out as a consequence of not having ward rounds before July 2016. So it isn't just mortality statistics that you need to look at nakedly, and we'll get on to that in a minute. So again, I would advise you to watch Stuart's video again. It's very enlightening, it's very well done, and I would advise you to watch it if you want to know what was really going on and what continued to go on after Lucy Letby was removed from clinical work at the Countess of Chester Hospital. But the interesting next thing that Stuart comes to is the Freedom of Information requests. And if I leave you a link to Stuart's video, then you can go through his links to his sources. But he has a Freedom of Information disclosure about deaths at the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. But it's much more interesting than I think Stuart realises. Now, because there's a really important interplay between birthing and death, you look at all deaths. They are called perinatal deaths. So that would include stillbirths, late perinatal deaths, and early perinatal deaths. And that gives you a better idea. In fact, it gives you the total picture of what's going on in the obstetric and perinatal, neonatal part of the hospital. And in 2013, there was 18 deaths in total. 2014, 15 deaths in total. 2015, 25 deaths in total. 2016, 11 deaths in total. 2017, 15 deaths in total. 2018, 8 deaths in total. So very basically, what that shows you is significant variation from year to year, or significant fluctuation, whatever word you want to use, in both stillbirth and early neonatal death. So if we consider that there's probably about 3,000 births annually, that's going to vary as well. So this is not a statistical exercise, it's simply a means of looking at a problem from very high up. Those counts in the stillbirth, so 8, 9, 12, 2, 11 and 6, is per 1,000, 2.67, 3, 4.67, 3.67 and 2. So the mean of that, which is not the same as the average, is the mean. So the average is typically the middle point, whereas the mean is calculated by adding up all of the values and dividing them by the number of values. And then we look at the neonatal deaths in that period. We have 3, 3, 8, 7, 2, 2. So per 1,000, that's 1, 1, 2.67, 2.3, 0.67 and 0.67. All of a sudden, not looking so bad, is it? So the mean in the first group, the stillbirths, was 2.67, and the standard deviation was 1.2 per 1,000. And for the early neonatal deaths, the mean was 1.39 per 1,000, and the standard deviation was 0.88 per 1,000. So if you look first at the standard deviation, so that just tells you how far something is from the norm or the typical. So if you have two coffee shops and they both sell cups that average 16 ounces, the first shop sells between 15 and 17 ounces. That's a small standard deviation. And shop B sells between 10 and 22 ounces. That's a large standard deviation. But both of them have the same average. Just that shop B, the second shop, is much less consistent in its sales. And a simple example of that in terms of medicine would be a hospital that delivers, on average, 10 babies a day, and it varies by one a day. Or another hospital that differs by 5 babies a day. So one of them has a coefficient of variation, that's the number of 10%, that's one baby a day on top of 10. And the second one has a coefficient of variation of 50%, 5 babies from 10. Now, if we look at this data, and it's a very small data set, and you cannot make too many judgments from it, but the stillbirth data, 8, 9, 12, 2, 11, and 6, the coefficient of variation is high in that situation. And that would suggest, to me anyway, looking at it, that the variation isn't random. They're not likely caused by chance, that they reflect some kind of change in the condition or the practices or the presentation of the population or something that is specific and not random. So in our coffee shop analogy, it would be like a bus stopping outside and everyone coming in to order 22-ounce cups. 30 customers all in a row. If that happens once, it will only appear once in the inventory, and it will be put down to chance, or someone might remember the bus stopping. So in general, if you have a coefficient of variation below 10%, you're pretty consistent. Between 10 and 20%, moderately consistent. Above 30%, highly variable, and above 50%, extremely inconsistent. So if we look at the stillbirths in this hospital, rather than the neonatal births, we can look at them in a minute, but if we look at the stillbirths have a coefficient of variation of 45%, which is very inconsistent. So it's a highly variable number. That is not going to happen over 6 years by chance. And Lucy Letby has nothing to do with stillbirths. Or at least Dowie Evans hasn't determined that she had anything to do with stillbirths yet. So for me, that reflects a change in the population characteristics, the presentation of the patients, processes, who you're admitting, that type of thing. Or a cog in the wheel of the network. For the neonatal deaths, the coefficient of variation is 63%, which is massive. Now, that's over this 6-year period or 7-year period, whatever it is. That's not in 1 or 2 years. That's over nearly most of a decade. And again, that suggests this is not random. But because we have variability in both stillbirths and early neonatal births, in other words, in perinatal mortality, it's saying something about the population, the network, the system. It's not talking about a bus stop with 30 people ordering 22-ounce cups or a single nurse murdering 7 babies. Now, I'm sure Richard Gill would be laughing at me, Professor Quigley would be laughing at me. I'm not a statistician, but you just need to look at these numbers. I just need to look at them to know they're not right. I can't say exactly why they're not right. I just know they're not right. I have looked at data sets of patient visits per month, per week, out of hours visits per month, per week, after midnight visits per month, per week, and you would be surprised at how consistent they are. And that's over a 4-county population. So much so that we were able to adjust our rota, or how many people that we had available to work, safely just by looking at the coefficient of variation and seeing how steady it was. Now, if we had tried that, picking a random number of people to work while disregarding or not knowing the coefficient of variation, we would have ended up with a disaster on our hands because we would have been overrun. And because we don't know what the background noise is, that is the junior doctors at Thirlwell Inquiry saying they didn't notice anything unusual in 2015, 2016. They wouldn't because they don't know what usual is. All I'm saying is, looking at this, you have to look at both the numbers, stillbirths and early neonatal deaths. The late neonatal deaths in this data set are all very low, but they're not counted in perinatal statistics. So the perinatal statistics would be the stillbirths and the early neonatal births combined. They only mean something when you look at both of them. So Dr. Gibbs saying we only had one death in 7 years wouldn't mean a damn anyway unless you knew what the background of the stillbirths were so that you could complete the number perinatal deaths. Judith Moritz wouldn't know a number, I suspect, unless it fell off the end of her wage packet. So she doesn't know just to repeat one death in 7 years because someone told her one death in 7 years. She didn't look at the neonatal statistics. She didn't look at the perinatal statistics. She didn't look at the coefficient of variation. She didn't look at how chaotic this unit was in terms of what was presenting to it from year to year. But someone should have been looking at it. But 2015 in this series was by far the worst year. 25 perinatal deaths. But we have quite a high number of stillbirths. So when we look at this coefficient of variation and apply it to the perinatal mortality number, not the neonatal deaths or the stillbirths, but the combined number, the perinatal mortality number, the coefficient of variation is 32%. So because we have such a small data set, we look at a bigger data set, and the bigger data set we look at is Embrace UK. And they're the people that collect all these perinatal statistics. And they suggest that for a hospital of this size, the coefficient of variation should be between 15 and 20%. So we have upwards of double a typical coefficient of variation in this unit over that period of time. That is not chance. Something went wrong within the system over that period of time. And for me, it climaxed in 2015, 2016, as it inevitably would, because it was an accident waiting to happen. If you don't have redundancy built into your system, if you don't have resources to call upon when you get overwhelmed, this is what happens. And the Countess of Chester Hospital had no redundancy built into it. The way we managed that in our out-of-hours service, by managing the roster, managing the costs, and still providing the service that was necessary, was by having a second on-call system. So we provided the redundancy for ourselves. Once we had a ticker number that showed that we were getting overloaded, we would call people in from home. Now, we didn't have to do that very often. And where we had a very high number of expected attendances, that would be bank holidays, Christmases, all that kind of stuff, we over-rostered. But we always had redundancy. And in this situation, to me, looking at it, I can see where they didn't have redundancy. They couldn't deal with twins, triplets. Triplets is adding 3 births per day to your typical number. It's going to overwhelm a neonatal unit. There's no question of that. It's going to overwhelm it. And as I would say, you would get a lot more information if you watch Stuart's video, which I'll link to this, and follow Stuart, because he really does make some very thought-provoking videos, and they're not easy to make, I can guarantee you. And he tells us why we don't have the data that we need. He tells us why we don't know what happened in the Countess of Chester Hospital, and why we may never know what happened in the Countess of Chester Hospital, particularly in 2015 and 2016, which are outliers in a way, but are not in the context of the coefficient of variability that we've just discussed. He talks about the evidence given by the risk midwife to the Thirlwell inquiry, where she said the neonatal unit staff did not approach the Datix reporting system in an open and transparent way. They would often only report an incident if they felt it was avoidable or there had been an obvious omission in care. And then the risk midwife is asked about the consultants. Was this a concern that you had about the consultants, that they were cynically and deliberately avoiding not filling in Datix until effectively they had no choice? And she answered, yes. And which consultants are you referring to? And she answers, I think I would say the body of consultants. What I found, certainly in neonatology, was they all stuck together. They wouldn't go up against one another. So even if they thought someone had made a clinical omission, rather than report it, they would have a conversation first, consultant to consultant. So all of this is just a sorry tale, and it does show you, and I have learned throughout my life, that complacency is one of the worst sins that we as doctors can commit. If we think that our practice is perfect, there's nothing wrong with this, we never make mistakes, etc., then we are really not serving the patients very well. And when you get someone to come and audit what you're doing, and when we organised and did blind audits and all kinds of things, we really did improve people's insight into what they were doing. And the goal of it was always to put the patient at the centre of decision making, because when that is the case, when the patient is in control of the decisions, when they give informed consent, which didn't happen in this unit, when they give informed consent, then there is less mistakes and certainly less blowback, because you've brought the patient with you or you've accompanied them on this journey. So it seems to me, and the point of this podcast is that we're not learning anything 2 or 3 years on. Lucy Letby's still in prison. She's still suffering every day. The families of these children are suffering every day, and they will suffer every day. I sat this evening and I had dinner with my daughter, who's now in her late 20s, and just going over the memories of childhood and our time together was a wonderful, heartwarming experience for me. And if I had lost that child for any reason, I would not be the same person I am today. I would have been forever broken. We are not serving Lucy Letby. We are not serving the families. We are not serving the NHS. We are not serving science. We're not serving justice. We are not building upon what we call civilization by persisting with this nonsense that came from Dowie Evans, and by not looking at this thing forensically and trying to work out exactly what did go wrong. So again, Dr. Gibbs and Judith Moritz saying there was only one death after Lucy Letby left doesn't serve anyone, and it's what the BBC calls misinformation and what I call a lie. The coefficient of variation was so wild in this place, there was nothing stable about it at any time. That tells me that no one was in control of anything. And as this situation rumbles on, it's obvious that that's still the case. So we'll bring this podcast to an end. I hope you got something from it, and I'll leave you the link to Stuart Gillam's video on YouTube, and I would highly recommend that you spend 15-20 minutes watching each one of his videos, because they're so well thought out. They're so considerate of all of the issues involved here, and they're so open-minded as well. I can imagine that Stuart has private feelings that he would like to express, but he doesn't do that. He just goes through the facts as he sees them, and that's what people should do. And I would highly recommend his work to you. So we'll leave it there, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.